Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next session of the ASEAN of Work conference track. And today's session will discuss how you can foster inclusive workplaces that support mental well-being and work-life harmony. With us today is the moderator of the session, Dr. Francis Yeoh. He is the president of the Singapore Association for Mental Health, and Dr. Francis today will be joined by Evelyn Kwek. She is the managing director, ASEAN ANZ of Great Place to Work Institute in Singapore. Baxter, CEO of Safe Work Australia, and Dr. Bicky. Bhangu is the president, Southeast Asia, Pacific, and South Korea at Rolls-Royce, Singapore. So without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic over to Dr. Yeoh to begin this session.
Francis, I think you're on.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this panel on fostering inclusive workplaces that support mental well-being and work-life harmony. My name is Francis Yeoh, and as introduced, I'm the president of the Singapore Association for Mental Health, or the SAMH. Now, SAMH is a community mental health charity that is now 53 years old, and we operate a number of rehab centers around Singapore, serving people with a range of mental health conditions. We've done significant work on youth mental health and using creative services in therapy. And so we have three experts today to share on this topic of inclusive workplaces from different perspectives, and I'm sure we're going to have a good learning experience in the next hour. So let me just briefly introduce our panel experts. You've got the full CV in your program. I'll just highlight a few things. First, we have Baxter, who's the CEO of Safe Work Australia, and that's a government agency established in 2008 to develop national policy relating to workplace health and safety and workers' compensations. So SWA, Safe Work Australia, adopts a tripartite model, which is very similar to the model adopted in Singapore. So there's a scope for exchanging notes with Michelle, and I'm sure we can learn much from Australia's experience. Next, we have Dr. Bicky Bhangu, who is the president, Southeast Asia, Pacific, and South Korea at Rolls-Royce. Those of you from Singapore will know that Rolls-Royce is a big presence in Singapore. Bicky is very active outside of his professional work. He's a council member of the Singapore National Employers Federation, SNEF, as well as deputy president of the Singapore International Chamber of Commerce, or SICC. And recently he was appointed as the co-lead for the Alliance for Action, or AFA, on work-life harmony. So we're going to ask him a bit about that work because that's very relevant to our topic today. He also serves on the board of the Cerebral Palsy Alliance of Singapore and is an adjunct professor at NTU, Nanyang Technological University. So it's amazing how he managed to squeeze so many roles in the same hour that we have, the same 24 hours that we have. So someone who is very active professionally as well as in volunteer work. I'm sure he'll be able to give us a very balanced perspective on this topic that we are discussing today. And finally, Evelyn Kwek, who is the managing director of A Great Place to Work for ASEAN and Australia and New Zealand. So GPTW, A Great Place to Work, is a global consulting firm with a wonderful mission, I thought, of helping organizations become great places to work. So I'm sure GPTW itself must be a terrific place to work. We can ask Evelyn about that later. So the company conducts employee surveys and regularly publishes a ranking of the great places to work in different countries. Right? And so Evelyn will certainly be able to share a lot of insights from the data that she's collected from not just Singapore, across the countries that a Great Place to Work operates in. All right, so our panel topic is fostering inclusive workplaces that support mental well-being and work-life harmony. And the key question we will tackle is how can employers create a safe environment and culture for employees to talk about their personal struggles in the workplace, as well as to look out for one another. So before, well, I mean, that's a topic of great concern, I'm sure, for us in this very fast-paced, high-stress, 24/7 kind of work environment that most of us work in. And of course, COVID has just made it much worse. But before delving into the question, I think maybe it would be a good idea for us to know a bit about the work our panelists do that relate to this topic. And of course, we'll set aside time for questions. So there's a question box that you could type your questions in, and there's an upvote facility, right? So we'll see how we can address the most popular questions later. Okay, but first let's start with asking the panelists about the context of their work. So let me start with Michelle. Michelle, you're calling from Australia, are you? Or are you in Singapore?
Yes, that's right. I'm in Canberra, the capital
Canberra.
of Australia.
Okay. Well, welcome to Singapore virtually.
Thank you. I wish I could be there personally.
Right. So I understand Safe Work Australia leads the development of national policy to improve work health and safety of workers across Australia. So maybe can you start us off by sharing a bit about how Safe Work Australia has been working with the tripartite partners to support workers' mental well-being and work-life harmony?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for that question, Francis. So Safe Work Australia works in a federated system. That's the government system we have in Australia. We have the Commonwealth government, but then each state and territory in Australia has its own government. And in terms of work health and safety and workers' compensation, each state and territory is responsible for their own legislation and running and enforcing their own schemes. Safe Work Australia, though, is made up of representatives of all of those jurisdictions, each state and territory in Australia. And as you noted at the beginning, Francis, we work in a tripartite fashion. So we also have representatives from employer organisations. We have two of those, and we have two representatives from employee organisations from our union movement here in Australia. So although I'm the CEO of Safe Work Australia, we've got 15 members in total, and it's a decision-making body. So everything that me and my staff do, we put forward to our members body, our decision-making body. So currently we are working with the members body on a large range of work to support worker mental health. For example, we're currently developing new model work health and safety regulations in relation to psychosocial health. We're developing a code of practice to address psychosocial hazards. Both of these acknowledge that the way work is designed and managed and the working environment, equipment used and workplace interactions and behaviours can all potentially harm workers' mental health, but there are many ways we control these risks. For example, ensuring workers have adequate downtime to maintain work-life balance is a key work health and safety issue, and if not managed well, can create a risk to workers' mental health. We've all seen how COVID has affected work and the adjustments that workers have had to make, especially those people who have been fortunate enough to be able to work from home. I think there have been some great challenges there in terms of the work-life balance, switching off from work. Here in Australia, where we've been having lockdowns of the population, schools have been closing. So parents with children who are at school now have the children at home. They're homeschooling their children, but they're also doing their jobs as well. So many challenges and many aspects coming out of the pandemic. I think I'll leave it there so that you can ask the other panelists some questions.
Okay.
Thanks, Ray.
Okay, thanks very much, Michelle. So let me go to Bicky. So we're going to ask you a question about the Alliance for Action, AFA, the acronym. So Singapore plans to move beyond flexible work arrangements to implementing work-life harmony. So as the co-lead for this AFA, can you tell us a bit more about what it does? and why is it important for the various stakeholders to work together for this cause. But perhaps before you start, maybe for the benefit of our audience who may not know this acronym, AFA, perhaps just explain what an AFA is, Alliance for Action, and then what the AFA on this work-life harmony measures does. Thank you.
Francis, thank you. Really, the Alliance for Action came about earlier this year when we saw the challenges the external environment created on sort of employer, employees, and communities, and society in general. So there was various measures that we need that Singapore had to take pretty quickly. And one of the aspects that was key on the agenda was work-life harmony. And how do we engage the right stakeholders to bring in the best practices of putting in recommendations that will serve the society, businesses, employees as a whole. So it really, even though the Alliance for Action is driven from a sort of national level, that the way the execution is done is really a very different methodology, which is a ground-up approach. And it's ground up in a way you bring together the sectorial community of practices together. And the role of the tripartite here, so the employers, the governments, and the union, is really more as a facilitator and observers whilst these conversations are happening, because we really need to really understand what are the key sentiments that are happening amongst communities, amongst employers, and amongst employees. And we picked 3 sectors in particular, particularly ones that are pretty hard to put work-life harmony towards: financial, manufacturing, and food services. And this required significant amount of engagements and connecting points. We held several workshops, again, the tripartite more as a facilitator and observer, but really the communities coming together and HR practitioners coming together. And in addition, 2 general workshops were also held. So 2,000 professionals were connected. And the output of that is to really bring together all these sort of the initiatives that would serve as a common purpose to that many organizations and many companies can use as a toolkit. So templates have been developed. Some of these specifics will include things like the after-work hour policies and templates. There's a toolkit within there where organizations can do a self-toolkit assessment on where they might be on their work-life harmony journey. The reason why the Alliance for Action sits there is because with the tripartite support, we want to make sure that the measures that we're introducing are sustainable, and not a top-down approach, but a ground-up approach, ground-up-led sustainable measures. And we're showcasing tomorrow, which will be introducing some of the templates and the work that the AFA Work-Life Harmony has done for the last 7 months.
Thank you. Very good. And you published all these guidelines and recommendations, right? But yes. Is that the end of
no.
the work, or is it?
No, absolutely not. And I'm sure our discussions will show that this is continuously evolving. Yeah. But what it does do is bring the community of practices together, bring the right ambassadors together. We've got a great vehicle to be able to get the inputs in and adapt the right approaches that employees, governments, and unions understand.
Yeah. Okay, I'm sure we're going to hear some more about this later. But let me go to Evelyn now. Well, Evelyn, you've got the role of engaging clients through a lot of these surveys, right? So what has your survey revealed about this topic that we are discussing, right? About companies, companies as well as the employees in the company, about implementing measures to foster work health harmony. I mean, what are some of the issues that are encountered, maybe challenges?
Thanks, Dr. Francis, and hi everyone. So, like you pointed out, Great Place Work, we have a very holistic mission. Our singular mission really is to build a better world by building great workplaces to work. And the two keywords really is about for all. And the idea is that regardless of who we are or what we do, we believe that everyone in whatever role we are, whatever industry, we all deserve to work in a great workplace. And also being in the people analytics business, we know what does well-being at work really mean, right? Because we have surveyed millions of employees around the world. We have the data that tells us what a great workplace looks like, and when it is not a great workplace, how that really looks like as well. So on the topic of well-being, really this has become a critical piece of employee experience. Before the pandemic and before the global crisis that we saw in 2020, already we saw that wellness was the number one human capital topic on the minds of C-suite executives around the world. And today, the corporate wellness market is gone up to be estimated around $61 billion and growing rapidly. Really what the world has gone through in this past year, it only serves to accelerate those trends. And this whole idea, this whole scope of well-being, it has, really evolved over time. It has grown in scope, gone past other years of giving pedometers, going through fitness challenges, right? But today, in order to attract, retain, and sustain great talent, if I might add, companies need to be able to support employees' full well-being. By full, I mean to go beyond just a mental, to look into the physical, the sense of purpose, that sense of connection, right? And the social well-being aspect. In fact, what we are seeing in our work with our clients really is that progressive companies around the world are now adopting this perspective that the workplace must allow employees to really bring their whole selves to work. And this term, bring the whole selves to work, sounds really fancy and really good, but honestly, it's not easy to do. And as part, before I go and talk about challenges, I think we all like data, right? And I want to share some data with the audience. So as part of our ongoing global research, Great Place to Work, we have partnered this year with Johns Hopkins University to design a study and create a well-being index, which we intend to track year on year over in individual countries and around the world. So we will be releasing the study and the results of how Singapore and Asia fare on this index in the later part of this year. But early findings, let me just give us a glimpse, all right? Early findings indicate that in Asia, nearly 40% of the people surveyed are highly dissatisfied with their overall well-being in life, right? And at the workplace, we are seeing that around half the employees, they are saying that if I work at the average workplace, I do not consistently experience an environment of well-being. And this scenario is true not just in Asia, but really across the globe. And this whole sense of lack of well-being is not just driven by pandemic, but there are really serious gaps in purpose and connection, which based on Great Place to Work's definition, this purpose and a sense of connection, they are core pieces of what well-being comprise. In Asia, the data is this, right? Around 40% of the people don't find meaning in the work that they do. 40% do not feel that they make a difference in the work that they do. So I go to work every day, I go through the motion, but what do they mean? They don't feel that they make a connection. 1 in 4 employees say, I feel lonely at work. 1 in 3 says they do not feel like they belong in the workplace. And this is what scares me. 2 in 3 says they are not optimistic about the future. And also this whole loneliness pandemic, it is real. And while the data may sound gloomy, but there is a glimmer of hope. The data I shared earlier really are the data of the average companies, the average workplace. So one of the key pillars of work that Great Place to Work does really is that we survey employees, and based on employees' feedback, if a company's survey scores meet the desired threshold, we then say they are Great Place to Work certified. So they are validated to be great workplaces. Now, from this pool of certified companies, we then have the best of the best, and they are recognized as a best workplace. So the data I shared earlier on, they are the data of employees at the average workplace. So we went to dig into the data of our companies, which are Great Place to Work certified. And this is what we found. Experiences of well-being are much better. 8 in 10 of employees around the world are having a positive experience. And this is compared to around 40% based on the average workplace. Now, the best workplaces, they raise the bar even higher. Nearly 9 out of 10 employees in this year's Brewer's Best list, what we found is that they consistently experience well-being. And you know what? This is not just about the feel-good well-being. By the way, these companies which have employees with great well-being experience, they have nearly twice as many employees saying, I intend to stay here for a long time. I'm willing to give extra, to go the extra mile. I'm highly engaged. And in fact, I will recommend my employer to my friends and family. And this whole conversation around the great resignation over the past couple of months, this will be great data for any HR folks out there who are finding hard to keep their people or to retain talent, right? As we take care of people's holistic well-being, the employees want to stay, they want to go the extra mile, and they recommend their employers.
Okay, so
those are some data that we saw.
So yeah, that's good and bad. Good and bad. As you said, you show the positive response from the companies that are great places to work, and then the average is actually pretty concerning. But what about the kind of challenges? Do you touch on that? Asking whether companies that are not able to provide the environment that is good for the mental well-being, what kind of challenges do they face?
I think the challenges are multifold, right? One of which really is that I think many employers or leaders or HR practitioners, sometimes we tend to view mental well-being as a standalone, whereas really it is about taking care of the employee's holistic well-being. To tackle mental well-being in isolation, employers may find it to be challenging and not sustained because they're all connected. That's one. The other bit is, how do we equip or scale up our people managers so that they're able to recognize signs, able to address, able to start a conversation? How do they know if I see a colleague or staff who is perhaps struggling? How do I lead with empathy? And also to create that sense of psychological safety so that my people could share concerns and struggles. And these are really some of the common struggles that we find from senior leaders to line leaders who are not able, not equipped to be able to look out and to support their people in this way.
Okay, I'm sure that's the kind of things that Bicky and Michelle would also be addressing, right? How to provide the education and the awareness in the workplace. But let me stay with Evelyn for a while longer. Now, so Great Place to Work understands, what are the great places and what are the not so great places, right? So how does this knowledge help making your organization itself a great place? I'm sure you would, although you're not ranked in the in the surveys, but I'm sure you aspire to be the example. So what are some of the things that Great Place to Work has done towards this objective?
Thanks. So I must first say that to have the name Great Place to Work, it is a pleasure, but it is a vision for us to aspire to. And for myself, constantly, whenever I interact with my team and with people, I have at the back of my mind all my Great Place to Work dimensions and survey statements that I kind of gauge myself on. And the Great Place to Work, the model, the idea really is trust, right? That a great workplace is one where there's trust, where people are treated with fairness, with respect, where there's camaraderie, and where people take pride in what they do. And really, it is not about the grand gestures or the proclamations, or it's going beyond policies, but it really is about day-to-day interactions between the leaders and the team members. How do we treat every individual member with respect? We don't see hierarchy, we don't see seniority. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, to be treated in an equitable manner. In a sense of camaraderie, I think we take great pride that we play hard and we work really hard. There is relationship beyond just a normal workplace relationship, but there is that sense of genuine care, right, for the well-being of the people. And that happens on a day-to-day basis. So we apply whatever we preach, we apply to our people internally.
Great. And what do you see? I'm sure you see benefits, but do you sort of quantify the benefits in any way?
Definitely, we do that.
And how do you do that? And how do you sort of quantify in some way?
I don't have the Singapore data, but global data, we actually find that companies which are Great Place to Work certified or their best workplace are those which are publicly listed companies. Their performance on the stock indices are 3 times better than their peers who are also publicly listed. So we do have data that demonstrate that when you put people first, everything else follows. Okay,
great. So let me now turn to Bicky. Bicky, Rolls-Royce is a large multinational operating in many places, including Singapore. So what, maybe you can share with us, what has Rolls-Royce done in terms of implementing measures that will help foster a positive work environment?
Thanks, Francis. When we look at the measures that we've adopted, I would say we've more adapted. Many of the measures were already there, but they just needed tweaking and amplifying and directing in the right places. If I look at flexible work arrangements, we've had this policy for many, many years, but just not many individuals were practicing it. And it was least practiced by senior managers and leadership because they wanted to cast the right shadow. But in fact, they're casting the wrong shadow by not practicing it. So, we had to have those very sort of conversations with everyone across the organization. We have what's called an employee assistance program, which is a 24-hour line support. And it's open to all our employees across globally who can call in anytime and just talk about whatever they're going through. And particularly, we've seen a spike more recently in trying to cope with the pressures or understand how to adjust between home and work relationships. And we've introduced more digital tools to help individuals and employees be able to understand that relationship that exists. We looked at our leave benefits, and this actually happened before the pandemic, but it's connecting with your employees and it's understanding your employees. And one that really resonated well was we enhanced our maternity leave, where we put in place, for example, it's 6 months, regardless of nationalities. These kind of practices show employees that actually the company understands us. But then really looking at sort of in the last 18 months, how we've adjusted our benefit schemes that we provide to employees. We've included, for example, reimbursements of ergonomics equipment. There's been a huge focus on musculoskeletal claims, and that's increased. It's third in our claims bucket, but we've sort of adjusted it so that more can be sort of tapped into. Childcare allowance has become quite difficult for many of our employees. Our average age of employees is 35. So being able to support childcare allowance so that individuals can put kids through nursery school whilst being able to manage the work-life balance. The wellness, and when we really started talking about wellness, it triggered a lot of conversations, which was really ground up led by our employees. That can we also tap into supporting family travel or holidays or staycations. And it's now our top reimbursed item. So it's not just sort of health conditions, it's well-being sort of conditions that sort of help with this. There's lots of global resources. There's lots of guidance, but it's really when an organization can connect with stories and individual stories who've gone through and are willing to share, that's the response that we see most significantly, and where all employees from all backgrounds tap into, because there's something of relevance and they can contribute or they can take away. And so these are some of the measures that we've started. Like I say, we just had to adapt and adjust, but really this understanding what's happening at an employee level and then putting the right foundations so that we can deliver the work-life harmony. And I'll talk later on, if we have time, what employees themselves are doing and asking for, which is really, really interesting.
Okay, great. Well, sounds like a good place, a great place to work. Huh? But what about for a private company that's, I assume, bottom line driven? Is there any way that you are sort of able to quantify the kind of benefits for people who are sort of concerned about, ROI?
And it's a really important point. And we are trying to understand that data internally as well, because we've got two levers or trade-offs that are happening at the moment. One is increasing the work-life harmony to its highest potential. So, so an individual belonging and the purpose that was mentioned earlier on is hugely sort of connected with. But the other part is also, we are in an industry that's had the biggest impact of the pandemic. which has led to a huge amount of adjustments, huge amount of consolidation, huge amount of refocus and priorities adjusted. So, as we progress with one lever, the other bucket becomes pretty heavy as well. So we need to sort of really strike the right balance between the two. And so really having as many conversations with your, and when I talk to my peers and across different industries, challenges are different. But one commonality that does come up is if we create more platforms that allow initiatives for employee to lead, and the structure of the management allows the foundations to amplify what employees are saying, it's such a success. I'll just give you one example in the course of time. We put together mental health champions. These are volunteers that we said, it'd be great if we can bring individuals who are interested to come together. 35 put up their hands. And they went through a pretty induction program and sort of continued training throughout the time. And these are some of the programs that they came up with, which they led. July, every month. So July was a focus on where did my time go? August was on managing change because of the change that we're going through in our organization. September is about engagement and recognition. And October is about isolation. And in November, the silver lining. We can see it coming. How do we now reposition ourselves? And that connectivity between employees and that understanding from employers and management, it is so powerful.
Great. Right. Very good to hear that. Is that from the corporate? I mean, is it across all the countries that you operate in, right? Or is it localized, like in Singapore?
No, it's ground up. So it is Singapore led. We're rolling it out to the region, and region contribute and access as well. And what we do have is a mechanism of best practices that we start sharing globally in due course.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Now, talking about ROI, I think I saw a report that says that for every dollar that is invested into providing, mental health support in the workplace, the return on the investment in terms of, lower absenteeism, medical claims, and so on is depending on which report I saw. I think I saw two. Singapore says it is $5.60. Well, that's 5.6x return. That's pretty good. And I think Australia, I saw some number in Australia, which is like 2.3 or something. I don't know whether that's correct, but that's, but it seems that, I don't know how they derive this. I'm sure there's some methodology, but it is not just doing it. So it should not be seen as a cost to be borne, right? But actually it has got its decent return. Okay, let's turn to Misha, and maybe you want to talk a little bit about COVID-19. Unfortunately, we cannot avoid talking about it. So how has the COVID and the pandemic impacted workers' mental well-being and work-life harmony in Australia? I mean, we know how it's impacting in Singapore. I'm sure it has a similar impact, but just share with us how has that impacted generally the workplace and also the work that Safe Australia does.
Yeah, thanks, Francis. Just on that return on investment issue that you were discussing, in Australia, we've had a recent inquiry by our Productivity Commission that shows the ROI to be, for every $1 invested, between $1 and $4 return. So not quite as specific as Singapore's 5.6, but somewhere between 1 and 4.
That's a big range, right?
It's a big range, yeah. However, here at Safe Work Australia, our own research has found that the majority of the cost of work-related injuries and illnesses are borne by community and workers. So we think the total return on investment is probably much higher than the $1 to $4. But on to COVID and mental health in Australia, I reckon it's probably very similar to the experience that you're having and have had in Singapore. There's the challenges have been many, And I'm sure everyone talks about the challenge of, working remotely, working from home. And if you're lucky enough to be a worker who can do that, sure, that's great because you can keep working, but there are some downsides. And I think we all are aware of them, isolation, always being turned on at work, all these other, home stresses playing into, how you're coping with the work in the home place. For some people, they're not safe to work from home. And in Australia, we've seen quite a significant explosion, I guess, in terms of calls and inquiries to mental health support phone lines and services. The Australian government's put about $23 billion into mental health during the COVID pandemic here. Sorry, did I say million? I meant billion if I said million.
Of course, yeah.
Sorry, billion. And there's many other players in this space as well. The National Mental Health Commission in Australia works very closely with businesses to try and, get the word out, to try and educate business about psychosocial, particularly in times of COVID. I think, and one thing that we have found in Australia, which I'm sure is the same in Singapore, is from the very beginning of the COVID pandemic, there were many calls from all sectors and not just business, but also employee sectors, unions and things, just wanting information on how to deal with issues generally related to COVID. But as the time wore on, much more focus and attention turning to mental health and psychosocial issues that people were experiencing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think it's the same in Singapore. I mean, the helpline went up a lot during the crisis. Let me touch on a small point which is related to the workplace environment, right? Because when we talk about an inclusive environment for the workplace, we are normally talking about how to prevent or how to make the workplace a lot less stressful for the employees. But what about the workplace that would have people in recovery working? That means employment for people who are in recovery from some kind of mental condition. I mean, it could well be employees, may lapse into some more serious situation and then come back and return, or it could be people who are outside who has a mental health condition, but who's actually under control and they want to get back into the workplace. I wonder if I think Bicky in the AFA or Michelle, do you address this part of it? I mean, I see it as a continuing spectrum, right? Providing as well as hiring people with mental health conditions or recovering from mental health conditions. Of course, the person has to be stable So maybe Bicky, does AFA go to that?
I think that a lot of companies will have their own policies, which will be non-discriminatory to any individuals that are being hired. And there are guidelines by just on the MOM that's set today on the best hiring practices and fair consideration frameworks that sort of also sits alongside it. So does it go into specific details? I think it probably needs to be addressed. But I'll probably take your question in a slightly different angle, which is, if we're looking at sort of some sectors where, let's take manufacturing as an example, where you have half your population that are working on a sort of a shift pattern and a very rigid timeline and time frame, and then you've got another half of your population that are more office-based, and they sit no more than sort of 50 meters from each other, and yet the sort of the flexibility of some of the measures may be perceived are accommodating just one portion of the staff. And that is something that the AFA and many organizations are very sensitive to, that this is not the solutions have to be servable for all. And there are practices that you can do for shift patterns. And it's normally the rigidity and the structures that sort of prevent those, and then you sort of, how do you adjust those to allow that to happen? And so it is, we don't want to leave anyone behind. It's a key message.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey that we want to take everyone along with us, and this will take time. But we've learned a lot from just the 3 sectors, and then we start to branch out to the others.
Right, thank you. Michelle, does the Safe Australia sort of mandate goes into employing people with recovering from mental illness?
Thanks. Yeah, not about employing people, but I guess, you know, the approach that we take is work health and safety is about preventing mental illness or mental health issues in the first place in the workplace.
Yeah.
But then workers' compensation, which we also have involvement in at Safe Work Australia, is about bringing injured workers back, workers who have been injured, back into the workplace, and ensuring that they're able to. This is that concept: bring your whole self to work, right?
Yes.
I mean, you bring yourself to work, not just in terms of you know, who you are, but it's about what you're experiencing, what you're going through, and this concept of an employer maybe needing to make reasonable adjustment for a person who may be recovering from a mental health illness, or living with one, in fact, and treating it. So yeah, I think it is the whole spectrum of, you know, prevention through to reintegration of workers back into a workplace, but always, you know, mindful of the fact that the person needs to be able to do their job, but as an employer, what could an employer do to ensure or facilitate the ability of that person to do their job? Are there things that need to be put in place to help that person?
Okay, thank you. I mean, that's an area of work which the Singapore Association of Mental Health does, you know, trying to get people to reintegrate back into the workplace, because that's known to be the best therapy, you know, for recovery. Okay, we have about 20 minutes left, so I think I should take some questions from the audience. Let me see. Okay, there's a question here. Let me read that. Since companies are adopting flexible working arrangements due to the pandemic, should we have mandatory benefits that cater to mental well-being? For example, extra leave, fitness memberships, etc. Anybody? I mean, because this, I think this applies to all. Maybe Evelyn, right? Since we've not heard from you for a while. Evelyn, what do you think?
Yeah, I think in Singapore, the only mandatory benefits that people have they are with respect to your maternity leave, paternity leave, and childcare leave. I really think it is for individual companies to customize what is best for their people. It's hard for the government to mandate at a whole of society level to decide what must be mandated in the flexibility package, right? So it really is about education, encouraging business leaders, business owners to think about what makes sense for their people.
Okay, yeah. I mean, on the same thing, I know that the AFA that Bicky is involved in has published a set of recommendations and guidelines. So I assume these are recommendations. That means there's no. It's up to. This is really more educating and letting employers know what they ought to do, but there's no. I mean, there's no pressure for anyone to adopt, right? Or does the AFA does it have targets or something that, you know, to track and see whether progress has been made on things like this? I mean, not necessarily just mandatory benefits, but the things you talk about, you know, like some policy on work from home and stuff like that.
So, Francis, I think we need to see you know, over the last months, we're at a stage of where consultation has taken place, connection has taken place, and we're at a stage of recommending best practices to the organizations, and then obviously facilitating how those implementation part goes. And we really need to allow that to happen to then really start taking stock to see how the AFA needs to come in, or perhaps how the tripartite needs to come in to sort of facilitate measures more. It's a journey. It's by no means that it stops, by a deadline. I think a great progress and connection has been made from a ground-up approach. We should let that roll out and see where we land.
Okay. What about Australia? I mean, are there sort of mandatory benefits that the government or the state impose on companies?
Not really, not anything beyond what already existed pre the pandemic. Certainly from a social benefit perspective, the Australian government has expended a lot of money in terms of people who lost jobs as a result of the pandemic, or businesses that closed down, to try and support them through. From my perspective at Safe Work Australia, with my staff, I required everyone who wanted to work from home to have an assessment undertaken of the place they would work from home to make sure that it was safe and appropriate for them to work. That was paid for by us. We paid for that for every employee. Under our employment arrangements at Safe Work Australia, we already have, employees already have access to reimbursement for, sports shoes, for instance, and things like that. But could I just say, I think one of the really, really critical things about this is maintaining connection with the workplace. And, some of the brilliant ideas that a number of employers and workers have come up with to try and maintain that connection whilst working remotely from home. I just think, that's a really important area and one that needs to be emphasised. Thanks.
Thank you. Right, there's a question which I think would be addressed to Bicky, right? Because it talks about the tripartite body. So till today, many do not accept mental illness as medical illness in supporting medical leave. Payment for mental illness are not treated the same as physical illness. So the question is, can the tripartite body make mental illness as part of physical? I suppose, can the tripartite body make the treatment of mental illness similar to physical illness in a company?
It's an important question, and I'm not representing the tripartite. I'm supporting the agenda from a SNF perspective, which is the Singapore National Employees Federation, and working very closely with MOM and the unions. So I think it is a conversation that needs to take place. I think it is as we have more of such conversations, we are all learning more, and then we need to take facilitate appropriate recommendations. So these conversations are happening, but please, I can't say any more than that.
Okay, let me take another question. Business leaders should be fostering mental well-being and harmony for all workers in the workplace. However, SME leaders, small and medium companies, may not be able to embrace the ideas. So I wonder, we can also have the experience from all three of you. The smaller companies, presumably, I mean, the smaller companies may have less resources. I don't know, right? But how do we get them involved into this as well, so that they also play their part in fostering this inclusive workplace?
I can take this first.
Evelyn, yes.
I think, to be honest, I think the government is doing so much through all these outreach sessions like this, the work that Dr. Bicky is carrying at AFA, the work through NTUC, through TAFED. I think there are a lot of outreach efforts that are going out to, especially the SMEs, right, to educate them, to empower them. The templates are being created, the playbooks are being created by IHRP. I think a lot is being done, and this really is a journey. It takes everyone to put their hand together. It takes a message to be spread, to be evangelized. So I think that we are already on that road, and that we're seeing shift. May not happen as fast as we may like, but definitely it takes different quarters from NTUC to SNF and the government to push all these efforts out.
But do you see, Evelyn, do you see what does the data show? That is it, I mean, the assumption here is that the SMEs probably are not as great places to work as maybe some bigger companies.
Well, I see there's a new spectrum of SMEs, right? The startups, the new ones are coming up. These companies, they are actually focusing a lot on great workplace culture. I'll be announcing my best workplaces in technology in a month's time, and there's a lot of startups, right, who are in this space. These people, there's a strong focus because they realize for me to attract talent, I better pay focus on this well-being. Then there is a whole spectrum of SMEs who are perhaps more traditional, business owners who may not have been, who are not used to this idea that my people are not resource, my people are human beings and I must take care of them. So this is a group of people, again, that the efforts are all being outreached to.
Okay, so that's good to hear about startups. I mean, I deal a lot with startups, and of course the famous mantra, was it Jack Ma from Alibaba, right? That says
996.
If you are not prepared to work 996, you don't join a startup. So I think maybe that has changed now. Maybe with the millennials, I think who are much more conscious about mental well-being. Okay, that's good to hear. Bicky, in the tripartite work, do you see any evidence to suggest that SMEs are less open to these ideas of mental well-being in the workplace?
I don't think there's less open, but there's definitely less awareness. One of the things that we have done through the various workshops is to make sure the SME population is well represented. This can't be sort of a divide between, yes, suitable for one organization and sectors and not suitable for another. We have to bring everyone in that journey. And there are some in the sharing that I've been observant to practices where SMEs have said, actually, that's really good practice. We didn't realize the value that can be unlocked. And it's simple practices to perhaps even putting a drink machine in the cafeteria. It transforms the connection between employer and employee and the care element that goes associated with that. So what we are looking to do is more sort of sharing from best practices with the SMEs. And when time allows us to do more sort of, go look see type arrangements as well to sort of what can be adopted. And it's the value that you unlock. It's not so much sort of you have to put the money in and then you never see it back. It's the value that's unlocked and trying to communicate that message across. So we have progressed quite a lot. So I think, yes, it's going to take time, but SME are part of that journey as well.
Great. Any evidence in Australia, Michelle, about the SME versus the bigger companies?
Yeah, I mean, certainly in the main, the SMEs have got a lot less resource than bigger companies. But to the extent that they're obligated under work health safety laws in Australia to ensure the work health and safety of workers at their workplaces, then they must comply, they must do it. It's a cost of doing business. Now, are they able to do it to the same degree that a big corporation is? Probably not. But like Bicky, I like the idea of, sharing small things and, incorporating small changes into your workplace may make a huge difference. So I think it is about sharing and opening up and, just making sure that everyone is aware, because I think that's an issue here in Australia as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we probably have time for maybe one more question. When a culture of mental well-being is not something common, or it could even be taboo, how do you break down the stigma that when they do reach out, it is totally fine? Let me see. Or the best way to put it, how to ensure that people, employees, know that it is okay not to be okay. Right. So that's a broad question, but maybe it's relevant to this discussion. So when you have a work culture that is not so common, right? So how do you start? I guess how do you get started? To let employees know that it's safe to acknowledge that you are not okay on some days.
And Francis, if I may start, please.
Yes.
This really starts at the top. It has to start at the leadership level. It has to start at the management level, and it has to be an honest, open conversation. We've done that in our organization, and wow, is it powerful. Leaders are perceived to be, nothing can break you, anything that's thrown at you. It's not. We're human beings, we're all as vulnerable as everyone else. And once you start sharing those stories with your first line and sometimes second line, and they go downwards, and you open the whole conversation. We've done many sessions where anyone can just come in and it's talked about mental well-being. It doesn't matter, what level of organization you're in, you're invited. Have those honest, open conversations, and that's how you change the culture. If you don't have the support from the top, it is really, really tough. And we must start at that.
Okay, and SNF represents the employers, right? The bosses. So you have to get the message through from the top. What about Michelle?
Thanks. Yeah, look, I completely agree with what Bicky is saying. The other thing that I would add is it's also about not just opening up and sharing the experiences and setting the workplace culture from the top, but also the leadership in the organisation being prepared to adopt a zero tolerance approach to any inappropriate behaviour that there might be in the workplace, and really just, demonstrate it will not be tolerated. But I mean, the real issue here is making sure the workplace is safe, and that if people feel safe, they can be, encouraged and assisted to talk about their issues, to seek assistance if necessary.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, and finally, Evelyn.
Just to add on with what Dr. Bicky and Michelle has said, I think it's also to cascade down the line. This idea of mental health first aiders, right? Where your line leaders, they know how to have that conversation, because not everyone's equipped to know how to have that conversation. So really training our leaders to be able to have that conversation, to know how to respond with empathy. Okay,
thank you. So we've got only a couple of minutes left. So let me try and summarize the discussion. So I think we're all aware there's a lot of greater attention paid to the importance of an inclusive workspace that support employee mental well-being and work-life harmony. Lots of effort going on. The AFA, the tripartite advisory, the work in Australia. I think this is worldwide, right? Every country recognizes this, and because the pandemic actually helped to push this agenda along. So what are some of the measures? I think the tripartite advisory has a list of good practices that can be the employers need to take note, and they can implement in the workplaces. I'm sure a Great Place to Work has a similar list of things that will support mental well-being. Important that it has to start from the top, as Bicky said, and that's why the SNF is involved, right? Because it's much more difficult from a ground up employee. The boss has to make it clear that it's a safe place, and then people are going to be able to open up, right? So important to have an open, honest conversation about the mental health situation, and to make sure that the workplace is a safe place, that people can be, it's okay not to be okay. Doing this is not just being nice, right? Of course, it's being nice, being respectful of people, but actually there's evidence to show that actually there's some return on investment, right? Depending on how it is measured, anything between 1 to 4 in Singapore's case, 1 to 4 in Australia. In Singapore's case, is about 5.6 times of the risk. So that's a good investment by any measure, right? So it's like, doing things, showing respect, doing all the nice things, and also getting an investment, right? So it's like a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer proposition. So a lot of awareness and education is still needed, and of the companies and employers who are listening, think, this is something to think about, and there's lots of help and resources available. Okay, so this is I wonder whether,
Thank you.
we have
Thank
1
you.
minute. We're done, huh? Okay, well, I was hoping to get everybody a final word, but okay.
Sorry about that, Dr. Francis.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr.
panelists,
Francis.
for your insights, and thank you for everybody who sent questions and are listening in. Okay, bye-bye.
Just a minute, please, attendees. Thank you, Dr. Francis. Thank you, Evelyn. Thank you, Dr. Bicky. Thank you, Michelle, once again. And for the attendees, we'd like to inform you that the ASEAN Future of Work Conference is now taking an hour and 15 minutes break. But please do join us for the next session after the break, which will discuss how to make lifelong learning reskilling work for everybody. All right. So to watch the session, please do toggle over to the session page under the conference agenda. And right now you can see a feedback link. All right. Please submit your feedback on this session via the link provided in the chat box now. And with that, once again, Dr. Francis, thank you very much. Evelyn, Dr. Bicky, Michelle, that was a fantastic discussion on mental wellness for all. Everybody, I hope you stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see everyone again very soon. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.